Recently in the news, obviously DeepSeek has been gaining kind of tremendous attention. I think there's rampant speculation about what it means for the state of AI, what it means for startups, incumbents, large companies, medium-sized companies, kind of the whole nine. So I'll prime the audience a little bit here with kind of what is DeepSeek. DeepSeek, very, very simply, is a Chinese-based open source model that then their R1 version has demonstrated capacity and capability that essentially matches the O1 model, which is a quote unquote reasoning model from OpenAI. And there has been kind of speculation across the board. There have been, minor reports coming out of various parties, but essentially, if you believe kind of the dialogue that surrounds this release, it has been trained and running at a tenth to maybe even less cost compared to OpenAI. And so as a result, we saw NVIDIA and other tech stocks kind of reducing as much as 17%, which in the case of NVIDIA led to about $600 billion of market capitalization loss, which is seemingly unfathomable, but kind of a drop in the bucket as it pertains to kind of the larger, I think, stock market shockwaves that could happen as a result of kind of this release. So happy to take this conversation in kind of any way you can. I've got some thoughts, but I guess Josh, I'll kick it to you first. What's your thoughts here?
The questions I've gotten are, is DeepSeek real, or is this some kind of fake thing in the news intended to drop stock prices? I'll answer that one right away. Yes, it's a real large language model. It's good. It's on par with O1. It's about an order of magnitude cheaper than O1 in output tokens. So this is inference. This is using this model once it's made. It's cheaper. Who's that good for? The good news is, if you're an application developer, if you're building applications using LLMs, this is a way to cut your costs significantly and still get O1 level quality out of your model. Your data doesn't need to go to the Chinese government. It's not monitored in that way. You can download the code. It's open source. So side story, OpenAI was co-founded by Sam Altman and Elon Musk. Elon put in the initial money for the project with the intention that it would be, number one, nonprofit, number two, open source. So that was the original intention of OpenAI, and Elon named it OpenAI for that exact purpose, for it to be open source. Down the road, after Elon's involvement ended, Sam converted the company to this really complex structure where a nonprofit owned a for-profit. The for-profit raised a lot of money from Vinod Khosla and others to generate a lot of profit in return for the shareholders. And that would be what they use to fund a lot of staff and a lot of GPU purchases. So now OpenAI is effectively closed AI. It is a closed source large language model. Anthropic, by the way, which is another large language model company, is also closed source. So these are the two leading providers of AI in the United States. They're both closed source. You can't download their source code. Their weights are not open. Okay, so what is DeepSeek? DeepSeek is an open source large language model built by a team in China. And so you can download their source code. If you use DeepSeek via their user interface, then it has content moderation. So you've probably seen people do some searches for topics that would be potentially sensitive in China. Those are filtered because you're using their user interface. That moderation doesn't have to exist in the model itself. And so if you downloaded the source code, for example, if you used it via some of the Hugging Face models on Hugging Face, you can find DeepSeek iterations that don't have the moderation. And I believe the Perplexity team has hosted DeepSeek directly without the content moderation. So DeepSeek is an open source large language model. You can use it without any data going to China or the Chinese government. And it is a really good model on par with O1. It is reported that O3, OpenAI's coming frontier model, will be better than DeepSeek's R1. And so that's sort of the state of play that we're seeing. Is if you want O1 level quality, you can get it for an order of magnitude cheaper in your API calls. So this is pertaining to anybody who builds an application using AI, like the ScholarAI team. So your output tokens are far cheaper.
I think the thing I would really mark up for just a general user, like maybe someone who's not a developer, maybe not someone who's in startups, DeepSeek is making a model that's competing with O1. O1, when you're just interacting with ChatGPT, like odds are you're not interacting with the O1 model. But what it's doing is it's doing this thing called like chain of thought, where it comes up and kind of thinks out loud. And that's just in general been seen to cause so much of a model performance boost that this is the model that, like, if there's any possibility that we begin to use like AI to solve scientific problems, to help it do math. If you looked like 2 years ago, if you asked like ChatGPT to solve an algebra problem, probably would have failed. It's this category of models that emerged within the last couple of months that all of a sudden it's seeming possible that we could actually like have it reason, right? The reasoning model piece of this is not something that you're used to if you're just using the ChatGPT app. It's not one that, like, unless you kind of go out of your way to trigger O1, odds are you haven't experienced it yet. But it is actually like significantly jumping from like what LMs have been capable of, insofar as coding, doing math. And you can kind of assume that if we figure out the problems of agentic memory, if we figure out how to make like long-term retrieval really, really common, it's pretty safe to assume that we could toss like a table of really complicated data at one of these things and could actually come up with accurate conclusions. We're not there yet, but it's a very big step change, like this category of model, in getting towards the concept of an AI model that you can tell it to do a thing and it'll do it very, very correctly. And that thing is high stakes.
I think for me, the biggest almost surprise is the surprise in the response. So I am, especially given the kind of really accelerated nature of all this progress with AI, I'm a little bit taken aback at how shocked the entire system seems by this release of a model. I mean, in theory, in practice, this is fairly well known and has been known for several months now, that once the foundation model exists, there are techniques, distillation, reinforcement learning, et cetera, that were used kind of in the paper that DeepSeek put out to mimic the performance of these frontier models. I think that there is some unique element of this release in the sense that it was, I think, previously thought that Chinese researchers, Chinese companies didn't necessarily have access to the largest, latest, and greatest NVIDIA chips. It's kind of my understanding that they've had access to H800s, which are essentially the functional equivalent of H100s for a long time. I know people, including Alexander Wang of Scale AI, are speculating that actually probably these teams have a lot more GPUs than they're kind of leading people to believe. I think even independent of that, again, I've been a little bit taken aback by how shocking this model release is to people, just in the sense that this felt inevitable to me. And even if you think that this was a greatly accelerated timeline to compare what would be expected, I think that's just kind of par for the course for AI more generally, which is these things are very hard to predict. We get new releases that kind of on a weekly or monthly basis that fundamentally change the way we're looking at things. So I don't know. I think that we're in store for O3 being released. That's going to be the frontier model. And then there will be some fast followers from a bunch of different research labs, the open source community, et cetera.
I think the way I look at it is, to me, I think that the surprise to me feels pretty earned, because my perception of open source, especially like something like a Meta Llama model, is that it's always been trailing and at best marginally worse than what is the frontier, like big enterprise solution, right? Anthropic, OpenAI were always in a different like category of conversation than Llama 70 billion was. Like the Llama at no point was like, oh, at a base value, I can use this to compete with OpenAI. I don't need to pay for OpenAI tokens. It was always, okay, I know this Llama thing is an option. I'm going to pay for tokens for OpenAI. I'm going to let them give me logs so I can figure out how I need to fine tune my Llama. And now Llama is suddenly competitive with OpenAI. I can turn off my OpenAI costs. It is, I think, the most surprising thing to me is the inference cost. There's a lot of reasons that go into that. Like we can get into that as it naturally comes up, but it's really fascinating to me that like we were able to get something that is beating the enterprise model in some cases, and it runs for so much cheaper, right? Whether you're using it on Hugging Face, whether you're using it through DeepSeek's API, and this thing was like it was not the original intent of the company, right? Like they just took what was happening in industry, observed, learned, and spent some time doing research, and like caught up all of a sudden. The distribution of like knowledge and the acceleration of AI, not surprising. There's a lot of interest in it. I'm just fascinated that they got something that could beat the enterprise premier model so soon and have it run cheaper.
Yeah, I think for me, we've gone through natural kind of inflection points in the training of these large language models and kind of the other, diffusion models that are related, the first inflection point was essentially the crawling of the entire internet, right? Once kind of those models kind of hoovered up that entire information data set, the next step was kind of this chain of thought, mixture of experts reasoning. So I guess my retort to you, let's say, is the maybe the methodology at which this team arrived at these insights is fairly surprising. I think I could concede that, and perhaps they have made some kind of more significant strides in the inference than maybe I'm giving credit for in kind of this general overview. But to me, I guess it just again seems intuitive that after something is introduced for the first time, the natural step of kind of innovation is efficiency as a next layer. And so we're going to continue to see, OpenAI and others push forward innovation for these frontier models. And then these fast follows are going to get, at least in my interpretation, begin and continue to happen.
Let's go.